For my honors Gov project, I decided to work with an NGO called Room to Read. Room to Read is a relatively new NGO which focuses on bringing education to children in underdeveloped countries, mostly in Africa and in South Asia. What I wanted to know was how the American education system compares to those in those developing countries, and what their government should do to improve their education standards. In the US, education isn't a significant problem. 99% of Americans can read and write. Education here is mandatory and is given to every child free of cost by the government. 16% or 775 million adults lack basic literary skills. 87% of those live in Asia and in sub-Saharan Africa. In Nepal, the first country where Room to Read acted, only 74% of males and 66% of females attend secondary school.
I joined Room to Read after reading John Wood's book, Leaving Microsoft to Change the World. And in that book, he talks about his journey from his role as a Microsoft executive until he founded Room to Read. He did so after making a trek to Nepal, where he met a school headmaster. This school had a library, but it only had about 20 books, and the books were not age appropriate. A lot of them were backpacker cast-offs. So John committed to come back to Nepal with books, and that was the beginning of his journey to decide to leave Microsoft and instead focus on helping kids get an education in the developing world. One of the things that we find in the developing world in general, it's not true in every country, but it's true in many countries, you find that the physical facilities of a school are much more modest than what we're accustomed to in the States. So we're used to these, bright, sunny environments with colorful posters on the wall. There's actually a book called The Third Teacher, which is about the importance of a child's environment when they're learning. So often when you enter school buildings in the developing world, you'll find that there are no desks, the walls are dark, there are no posters, there aren't good materials. So one of the things that Room to Read works on in the countries where they operate is just a more pleasant physical environment, and that helps with learning. Another thing, too, that they're working on increasingly is curriculum. So here in the States, especially with younger children, we're really focused on interactive learning. So, we use all kinds of techniques like flashcards and games and, activities to help children learn. There are all kinds of fun vocabulary exercises that kids do. And in the developing world, that's not the case in most countries. There's much more of a stand-up lecture style, more like the kind of university instruction that we would see here in some universities. And little kids don't learn well with that type of learning. So teachers tell us that when they adopt the Room to Read techniques of making learning more interactive, the kids obviously do a lot better. So the Girls Education Program is not just a scholarship program. They also, there's really sort of a material support component, which would include school fees, uniforms where they're applicable, and transportation where it's needed. So for example, they might give a girl a bicycle to help ensure that she gets to school. And then there's also more of an emotional support component. So students have mentors, they have life skills workshops, and they have a social worker who will help them with problem solving. So for example, if they're under pressure to stop school and to start working, the social worker would try to get involved to persuade the parents that in the long run, the child will be able to earn more for her family if she's able to stay in school. So that's roughly how the program works. And it's important because about 2/3 of the illiterate people in the world are girls and women. So, in a lot of the countries where Room to Read operates, girls are uniquely disadvantaged. Often, because schools are not free as they are here in the States, and families have to pay school fees. Um, if the family can only afford to send one child to school, they'll often send the male child and not the female children. But in a lot of families, over time, they're becoming persuaded that their girls will be better off if they marry later and are able to finish school.
Room to Read has chapters all over the world. I worked in the recently founded Boston chapter. In the beginning of my service learning activity, I met with various different people who are highly involved with Room to Read, so that I could better understand the NGO I would work in. Then I began helping prep for the biggest fundraiser event the Boston chapter does. My job was to visit, meet, and mail restaurants to ask for gift certificates, which would then be raffled or sold in a silent auction.
On February 26th, we held an event at District Hall in Boston, and we chose that venue because it's an unusual venue. It's a fairly new building, and it's an innovation space, really an entrepreneurial space, and we got good feedback on it because a lot of folks had never been there before, and we felt like the space had, sort of an unusual modern feeling, and just generally it felt like a really energetic space. So we raised about $40,000 from ticket sales, from silent auction items, from a raffle of Red Sox tickets, but the neat thing that came out of the evening that was totally unexpected, a Bostonian brought her cousin who happened to be in town from New Jersey. The cousin had done a lot of research on Room to Read already. He had traveled to Nepal, so he knew something about the organization, had read a bunch of articles, and he decided that he was going to do a fundraising project for his 65th birthday. So initially, I think his fundraising goal was going to be pretty modest, but he was persuaded over the course of the evening to raise $65,000 for his 65th birthday. So he's got his fundraising page up, just like our Camino team did, and his goal is to raise $65,000. So it's only been a few weeks, and I think he's at $8,000. So he's telling all his friends and his business associates, I don't want anything for my birthday, but if you really want to do something, I'd love it if you'd support Room to Read. So we were very excited about that because we feel like we've secured a new fan.
After a lot of research, I was finally able to get a suitable answer to my complicated question of what these countries' governments should do to improve their education. I believe that their government should use organizations like Room to Read to learn how to teach kids, and slowly these governments will be able to establish curriculum and a method that will work for them, just like the US did many, many years ago. Over the summer, me, Alan, and one of our best friends, Lorenzo, did what is known as the Camino de Santiago. We hiked over 500 miles across northern Spain. More importantly, we were able to raise over $20,000 for the Room to Read Boston chapter. I decided to do my learning service activity there so that I could better understand this fascinating NGO and how it worked.